Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about helping you identify poisonous communication and toxic behavior. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That's why it's important that you learn to pinpoint manipulative and controlling behavior so that you keep your power and your sanity. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Welcome to another episode of Love and Abuse. If you are new here, welcome. I hope you get something from the show. I highly recommend you listen to more than one episode. If you just listen to this episode and you don't get what you want, I have many more at loveandabuse.com. And if you are a regular listener, you are probably aware of all the episodes because you are dealing with something that is very difficult to deal with. And this is why I do this show. I've been doing this since 2019, and I come out here. I want you to learn as much as possible about emotional abuse, control, manipulation, all of the bad behaviors, hurtful behaviors that some people can do in our lives. And the more you know, the better off you are, the more prepared you are, the more information you have to make the right decisions. And I believe good decision-making requires a good handle on what's going on in your life. Now, that doesn't mean you always know. With emotionally abusive situations, you don't always know what behaviors are necessarily abusive. I mean, you'd think it would be easy. Hey, that person disrespected me. That's hurtful. At a minimum, that's hurtful. Hey, that person disrespects me on a daily basis and makes me feel guilty. That's abusive. So before I continue, this show is for educational purposes only, so I hope you get the education you're looking for. And of course, always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being, and always pick your battles wisely. So with that out of the way, what I'm saying is that sometimes there are behaviors that we can be exposed to, sometimes on a daily basis, that we may not believe is bad or wrong or hurtful. And we can start to blame ourselves or think that we're viewing it wrong, we're perceiving it incorrectly. And when we do that, we start becoming more tolerant of bad behavior. And the more tolerant you are of bad behavior, the more it continues and the more pervasive it becomes. So that is important to know as you move forward in any type of relationship where somebody is hurting you in some way. Now, you may not even know they're hurting you, but you feel hurt. I should probably put it that way because, especially for this episode, you may not know that the behaviors are abusive. You may not know that they are an effort to control or manipulate you. In fact, in my Healed Being program, I talk to the emotional abuser who wants to change, and I ask them to ask themselves before they do or say anything. I ask them to ask themselves the question, is what I'm about to do or say an effort to control or change this person? And I think that's a great question to help them connect with the reason they're doing a behavior, because if you don't know you're doing it, then it can be hard to stop, or at least you don't know exactly what to stop. So this helps, and it helped me during my healing process too. It helped me continue to reflect on the reasons that I do or say things to someone I care about. For example, someone might say, what you're wearing isn't appropriate for where we're going. That might sound so benign, but it might be an effort to control or change the person because what they're wearing isn't good enough for that person. But what they say is something that sounds logical. Like, hey, we're going to go and I'm going to have a business office party, and what you're wearing, it's not really appropriate. That will stand out. And so what happens is the emotionally abusive, controlling, or manipulative person will say things that don't make them the bad guy or girl or person. If they aren't the focus of the bad news, for example, then you really have a hard time pointing at them and saying, you are doing this to me. You are causing this. And so this is why sometimes we can't figure out exactly what we're seeing is actually a red flag. And when we can't see it, it's hard to identify and it's hard to stop it. So this is why it continues a lot in many relationships. And you don't want it to continue, of course. But what ends up happening is the behaviors that go under the radar like that, they become more numerous. And the more numerous they are, the less likely you're going to see them because the relationship's so saturated with this deceptive type of behavior. So I kind of primed you for an email that I'm going to read that there's a lot going on in the relationship. And this person doesn't know if what they're experiencing could be emotionally abusive or a sign that it's going to be emotionally abusive, or is it something that normal relationships go through? And I will preface this reading with the thought that I had while reading it, which is, how much is one person willing to expose themselves to until they finally take a stand? And the behaviors going on, what this person described, made me just come up with that question. How much does someone tolerate before they stand up and say, no more? It's really what it comes down to. No more. This isn't going to happen anymore. And there are many reasons that a lot of people can't do that. But I think there's a point where if you don't say no more, or if you just say that inside, like, no more, I'm not going to take this anymore. I need to do something else. I need to change direction, make a course correction, and move into another place in my life without this person, or at least put a stop to the behavior. There has to be a point where that happens. Otherwise, it never stops. And if you've never heard this show before, I like to talk about the trend line in relationships. The trend line is what has been happening will trend and continue to happen. In fact, I'm not even going to describe the diagram I usually describe where the trend line goes up and to the right, you're making progress. I don't even have to get into that. All I have to say is whatever the trend has been, the trend will be. Tweet that into your brain. Whatever the trend has been, the trend will be. And I like to handle objections too, where somebody asks, but Paul, what if they change tomorrow? What if they realize how much they're being a jerk or hurting me or whatever? What if that happens? And I always say, what you have seen is what you will get. What has been the trend will be the trend, and you cannot rely on someone's potential. You can't. You can't even put that into the equation. You have to accept how they're showing up today as who they are and who they will always be. That means you make decisions based on what you've experienced in the past and what you're experiencing now. Because the future is wide open and imaginary. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. So all you have, all the data you have, is in the past and in the present. It's possible they could change. They could have an epiphany. They could have a breakdown. They could have all kinds of things happening. And if that happens and they realize they're hurting you and they want to stop, and they do stop, fantastic. It doesn't stop you from doing what you need to do for you today. That has nothing to do with it. Their decisions of what they do or don't do tomorrow has nothing to do with what you do today. Well, what if I move out? That might be a question. If you're living together, what if I move out and then they do change? Well, that's great. But if they change overnight like that, that's highly suspect. In fact, almost always, I see this all the time, the person being abusive that faces the greatest accountability of you not being in their life suddenly becomes nice. And you have to be very careful at this point, because the abusive person, they become nice to get you back in their life. Not always, but this is what happens. They realize that if they aren't nice, they won't have you in their life again. And so what they need to do is be nice. So that could be another tactic, which is why you shouldn't make decisions based on what they could be, who they could be, how they show up. You should make decisions on how they've been showing up and how they're treating you today. That way you can just make your decision and do your thing, take a stand if you need to, walk out if you need to, whatever it is, whatever you need to do for you based on the past and the present. But don't base it on the future. And if they do decide to treat you nice, great, because you can continue having communication with them if you want, unless they're very aggressive or violent. I don't recommend that. But if they suddenly realize that they've been making a mistake and they've been hurting you and they feel bad about it, keep the line of communication open, but don't get sucked right back into the same situation. Give that a lot of time. Give that time. Just because you move out doesn't mean it's over. It just means you have to go through this phase so that they understand that you won't tolerate it anymore. Or just because if you're married, if you get divorced, just because you get divorced or you're separated doesn't mean it's over. It could. It could mean it's over, but you need to show them that you're not going to tolerate it anymore. So if that's the decision you make, that's what you need to do. And just because you aren't talking to them for a week or you're living in different rooms or whatever it is, it doesn't mean it's over. It just means you had to take the step to protect yourself. You have to protect yourself. And this is sort of where I'm going with this email today. So I'm going to read you this message and I'll make some comments after. The message goes like this. Hello, and thank you for your podcast. I have found myself in a situation as follows. I'm struggling to understand if this situation is abusive or maybe I'm expecting too much. I'm divorced from an abuser and I was living on my own for the first time in a long time. A friend of mine kind of imposed himself into my life. Within 6 months, he has moved in with me. He forced his name onto the lease of my new place on month 3 of our relationship, and he hasn't worked since we started dating, and I pay for everything, and I'm expected to pay for his habits, smoking, beer, and weed. He makes me feel insecure when I do basic hygiene things like shower and wear makeup to work. He accuses me of trying to impress other men. I work hard over many years to achieve my career success, but he says statements like I don't have a real job, or I work too much and I must do it for unfaithful reasons for my employer, as that must be the only way of working my way up in a man's world. I know what you're thinking already. Your blood's probably boiling as I read this to you, but let me finish and we'll talk about it. He has put me into debt up to $10,000 in just 6 months. He has zero respect toward my boundaries or privacy. I'm being accused of being the abuser whenever I raise the point of boundaries being crossed, and it has resulted in my phone being smashed and holes in walls and even a neighbor calling the cops. Sometimes I feel like I'm trying to hold on to my independence, but I now feel maybe I'm in an abusive relationship. I have asked him to leave. He doesn't pay rent. He doesn't have a job. When he threatened me and said that he will have me removed by the cops. But it's all my belongings in my home. How can I exit such a situation, and does he deserve a face-to-face explanation? He has an amazing ability to use my emotions against me, and he won't leave. If I leave, all the bills are in my name, and so is the apartment. What can I do? Am I being abused, or am I imagining this and maybe even possibly causing it? We fight aggressively as I don't have a filter nor patience for disrespect. I can't talk to him about his behavior or he starts blaming me. But maybe he's right. Is this normal relationship behavior or are these flags I should be paying attention to? Thanks for any clarity you can provide. I'm giving us a moment to soak what I just read in. Because there are people listening right now that I know they're saying, well, it's so obvious. He's taking advantage of you. It's just a terrible, terrible situation. You need to get out of there as soon as possible. There are people thinking that right now. I am thinking that right now, but I'm not going to say just get out. I want to address this because you wrote this, it tells me that you don't know. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You don't know all the behaviors that are components of emotional abuse. And because you don't know, if you don't have a lot of relationship experience, you said you were married for a long time. I didn't say the number of years to keep your privacy, but you were married for a long time. And if that was your only relationship experience or one of the few, then you don't have any. And when you don't have any, you don't know the flags. You don't know what to look for. You don't know what is normal, especially if the last person that you were in a relationship with was abusive. What's your reference? You don't have any reference for healthy behavior. First of all, I have, as of this recording, over 93 episodes of Love and Abuse. Listen to as many as you can, and you will be educated. You will be so informed that what is going on is very, very toxic. And so that's my first comment about your message. And I appreciate you sharing all of this. I want you to stay strong because you're going to need your strength to not only get through this, but past this. And it's going to require you to really reach into yourself and pull some of that strength and courage out that you're going to need to get through this, because there's a lot going on here. And it really does come down to this relationship is toxic. It is toxic. So if you need someone to validate what you already believe to be true, or at least at some level, take it from me. He is a highly toxic person. And the individual items that you listed, each item can be looked at as something that may not be abusive. And this is the hard part sometimes, is that one thing can happen and we might think, well, I don't know if that's abusive. Yeah, he disrespected me that time, but is that abusive? Because I've been known to do that. I've disrespected people before, so maybe that's not abusive. Well, he makes fun of my outfit or tells me that he's jealous or he thinks that I'm flirty at work. Is that abusive, or is that just an insecurity and that's just a normal relationship thing? Well, individually, these things at an individual level aren't necessarily all abusive. Some of them are for sure, but a lot of these, if you looked at each one, you could look at almost any relationship in the world and say, well, it happens in that relationship, and that relationship's not abusive. And so we have to be careful with that. We don't want to take an individual thing out of a big clump of things and say, well, that's not abusive. We actually have to connect all the dots and see the big picture. And so this is why I'm glad you wrote all this down in this email, this person who wrote, because it gives me the big picture. It makes those connect the dot pictures you used as a kid or maybe as an adult. You just draw a line to each dot and then you make an image, a picture of something. And that picture tells you what's happening. So each one of these items that make you feel bad or make you feel sad or make you feel confused makes a bigger picture of a very toxic situation. That's what all these dots are making. So I'm going to read you these items one at a time. You said things moved fast. So individually, that one thing may or may not be a bad thing. I mean, it's not always a problem. I prefer things to move very slow so that you can go at your pace, the pace that you feel comfortable with, so that you can find out where this is going to go and how they're going to behave and how they're going to act. Are they congruent in their behavior? Meaning, do they do what they say they're going to do? Are they respectful? You have to gauge all this stuff, and it can take a long time. It can take 6 months, a year, or even longer to make sure somebody shows up the way you're hoping they continue to show up in a kind, respectful, supportive, generous, caring, loving way. You need to make sure that you know what looks good, that it isn't just on paper, it is who they are. Is what they're doing now good for you? Is it healthy? Is it loving? Is it supportive? All of that. Because if it's not, it might get worse. In fact, if they've made you feel bad or sad or made you feel guilty more than 2 or 3 times, we might be looking at a trend. So you have to watch those trends. So things move fast. It's not always a problem, but it could be a component of abusive and controlling behavior. So that's a dot, right? We're putting all these dots on the page. That's one dot. So as one dot, things moving fast, yeah, sometimes it happens and sometimes it works out. But as an individual item, not necessarily abusive, but let's make another dot here. The next dot is you're saying that you're not sure if it's abusive. To me, that almost always means, at a minimum, whatever's happening is making you feel bad. And at a maximum, at the top, it's controlling and manipulative. There's no good side to that. So if you're not sure if it's abusive, that means you feel bad in some way. And because you feel bad, there's no good side to that. So if you don't know, then you're still in a bad situation that needs to be corrected. Like I said, there's no good side no matter how you look at it. So here's another dot that we put on the page. The dot is you're not sure if it's abusive. I mean, if you're thinking that at all, I'm not sure if this is hurtful or abusive behavior, then there's already a level of toxicity there. There's already something toxic going on in some way, or at least hurtful that hasn't been addressed. So that needs to be addressed. So there's another dot on the page. Another dot is he got his name on your lease for 3 months. By itself, we might not see that as abusive. It seems fast. Maybe it's a great relationship and you think it's going to work out. But with those other 2 dots on the page, things are starting to make a bigger picture. Still not, the worst picture yet, but it goes along with moving fast. When you move too fast, he's got his name on your lease. And you even said, and I almost forgot, you said he forced his name onto your lease. If you have to use the word force with something that you're describing that he's doing, that's a problem. That's toxic. You have to be very careful about people that force anything. If they pressure you, if they force you, that's not good for a relationship. It's not healthy behavior. And for the people that already know this is true, I'm talking to those who may not have the relationship experience that you do. And maybe you need to hear it. So whoever it is out there, it needs to hear that. Anyone that pressures you or forces you into any type of contract or arrangement or sex or anything like that is not healthy. It's very toxic. And you need to do something about that. You need to put a stop to it. You need to get away from it. Don't want to be in that situation. So that's one more dot. The next thing is he doesn't work. Okay. We all go through periods of unemployment. Well, a lot of us do. I've done it. I've had periods of unemployment. Not a big deal. But we have like 3 other dots on that page. And yeah, this is starting to feel not so good. He doesn't work. It's not abusive or unusual, but he moved in and put his name on your lease. So I would think a nicer person would pay to live with you. I would think that if they care about you, that they would want you to not bear the burden of all the bills, especially a new relationship. And they would want to prove that, hey, I'm worthy of living with you. I'm really grateful that you're providing this place to live. So I definitely want to pay for it because I'm a man of integrity, or a woman, or any person. This is all part of being in a healthy relationship, is being equitable, is being fair with each other. Hey, you're providing the apartment. I want to help you by giving you half the rent every month. I want to buy half the food every month. That's normal. That's healthy. That's expected. Some people may not be able to do it, but in a new relationship, it's a little strange for that to happen, for someone to just move in and then take advantage of that, not paying anything. So that by itself, it can happen to any one of us. Sometimes one person's working and the other one's paying all the bills, and sometimes it changes roles where the other person's now not working. I went through that in my marriage. But that I would expect in longer term relationships, not in a new one, but it can happen. So by itself, not a big thing, but with the other dots on the page, and we're not even finished putting these dots on the page, what kind of picture are we painting here or drawing? So the next thing is him putting you down for your hygiene and your job. Wow. Instead of worshiping the ground you walk on because you give him a place to live and you support him financially, he puts you down. He defeminizes you by telling you that you're in a man's world and working your way to the top. You're attractive, so he makes you think that you must be flirting, or I don't get that. I mean, I get it. I know exactly what's happening, but that really gets my anger going because that's not cool. We're going to put a big dot on the page and say, whoa, this is a big area of concern here. If you need anything to make a decision, you can use this one item. He should be worshiping the ground you walk on. You take care of him. He's like a child who's being taken care of by a parent. I don't mean to make it sound like I'm putting you down for that, but I'm putting him down. That's not right. He not only is he being financially taken care of, but he also puts you down. He also makes you feel less of a woman. Big dot right there. I'm just going to just plop it on the page right there, and I'm going to go to the next one. In 6 months, you're already $10,000 in debt because of him. That dot is on the page. It's also a big one. You are taking care of him. You are paying for everything, and you're already $10,000 in debt. Remember the trend line. What's been happening will happen. In 6 months, you're $10,000 in debt. Guess where you're going to be in 12 months? I'm going to guess $20,000 in debt. Guess where you're going to be in 2 years? This is going to get worse. You are already $10,000 in debt, and you are already in emotional deficit because of everything else going on. I could stop right here and make a picture that is very clear to you, connecting all these dots. I could stop right there and say what you're doing, where you are, the situation you're in now is going to continue draining you emotionally and financially. So it's important that you make a decision as soon as possible. But I'm not going to stop right there because there's more. You wrote more, and I'm going to read them all because I want you to hear this. I want you to take it in and understand, at least from my perspective, using my inflection, the way I'm reading this, how important this is to take care of as soon as possible. Make a decision as soon as possible. The next one is he doesn't respect your boundaries or privacy. Again, there's a giant dot on this page that we're making a big picture. The picture right there, just that one item, is enough for me, myself, to get out of a relationship. If I were in your situation, I would get out of that relationship because they don't respect my boundaries. They don't respect my privacy. That's all I need. That's a value of mine. I need to have my boundaries respected. I need to have my privacy respected. I need to be respected in general. That's one of my high-level values. If you've never done a values exercise where you write down what's important to you, you need to do that. What's important to you about being in a relationship? You write down the things that are important to you. Well, I like to laugh. I want to be respected. I want the other person to know, give me space, give me time when I need it. I want the other person to treat me well. I want the other person to have a job. I want the other person to do all these things or treat me in a certain way. And if that doesn't happen, well, that's unacceptable. I cannot accept that. So it either has to happen, it has to start happening now, or I need to make a decision that honors myself and aligns with my values. That's how I live my life. If my girlfriend started doing any of this, we would have a real conversation. Hey, you need to start respecting my boundaries. And if she says, I don't care about your boundaries, or your boundaries are ridiculous, I would say, you need to start doing it. Period. If you don't start doing it, there's going to be a problem. I know that's coming from me. I feel okay saying that. I feel strong in myself saying that. I may have done a lot of healing around this because I used to be a people pleaser, but I'm doing it because I know what happens when I am out of alignment with what I value. I know what happens. It is self-sabotage. If you want to destroy yourself, I know that's very dramatic, but this is how I see it. If you want to destroy yourself, then make sure that you're not in alignment with your values. If one of your values in a relationship is to be respected, and that value is not being met, and you've talked to the person and they still won't meet that value, it's time to say this isn't a relationship anymore. It's not in alignment with my highest interest for myself. It's not congruent with who I want to be. So I don't want to be a person that gets disrespected. So I'm going to honor myself and take steps so that doesn't happen anymore. Because anytime you're out of alignment with what you value, you end up sabotaging yourself. I think that's important to remember. Let's go to the next dot. He's accused you of being abusive. Again, opposite of worshiping the ground you walk on when he's being taken care of like an infant. I'm putting him down a little bit, but it makes me angry. It's not supposed to happen. He's supposed to show up and be an equal partner in this relationship. So unfortunately, abusive people will do this sometimes. They will tell the other person that they're being abusive. What that does is take the attention off the real abusive person and put it on the victim. Because the victim is usually so empathetic, so caring, and so kind and generous that they don't want to appear like anything other than those good qualities about themselves. They don't want to think that they're the bad guy. So what they'll end up doing is hearing something like that and start analyzing and reflecting and being introspective so that they can determine where they are being hurtful and where they're going wrong. It's all self-focus. It's all concentrating on yourself to take the spotlight off of them. So that's what he's doing. He's putting the spotlight on you to make you focus on yourself so that he can get away with his bad behavior. If you're focused on yourself, he doesn't have to take responsibility. In fact, he knows you have the power. He knows you have the power. You pay the bills. You are in charge. It's your apartment. And what he's doing is trying to slowly whittle in and take that power away, or not give you as much power as you have. And the less power you have, the more tied into this toxicity you are. By putting his name on the lease, he's taken some of your power away. I want you to start seeing things as someone taking your power away. When they do something that makes you feel bad or does what he's doing now, takes away your ability to make decisions for yourself, something that you want to do for you, or if you want to get away, and it's harder and harder to do that because they keep enmeshing themselves into your life, then you need to see that as someone taking your power away. Because if you see it that way, then there's no question. There's no question that this is a bad situation that needs to be rectified as soon as possible. And this person knows you have the power because he doesn't want to stop being lazy and drinking and smoking. He doesn't want to stop doing that. So he is going to make you feel bad, use your emotions against you, like you said, and continue putting the spotlight back on you instead of on him where it should be. There's a big dot on the page. Let's put another one on there. He's already shown he is violent by intimidating you. He's putting holes in the walls. He's smashed your phone. That's very aggressive, very scary. And he's doing that so that you will be compliant. Because if he can put a hole in the wall, he can hurt you as well. And I'm not saying that everyone that puts holes in the walls can be violent against people too. I'm just saying he's doing it to make you feel afraid of him. Because if you start to make decisions on your own and you think that, oh my goodness, he kicks the wall, he might kick me. He knows this. He wants you to feel afraid. Is this 100% true? Can I be 100% right? Maybe he just has a bad temper. Yeah, that's possible. But remember the dots. All these dots are connecting and making a bigger picture of what's happening in your relationship. So that's definitely, you asked about red flags. That's a red flag. You have to be careful around people that are so aggressive that they're willing to show you their anger in destructive ways. And, he's not doing it in his car. He's not doing it on a pillow on the bed. He is showing you visible damage, and he wants you to be intimidated. That's a scary thing. I don't want you to be in that situation, and I'm not trying to scare you at all. I'm just trying to say that this is part of the bigger picture, and you just have to be aware of it. Got a few more dots here. You say you may be trying to hold on to your independence. So I'm not sure where that comes from or what that means, because from the way I'm looking at it, you have no independence in this relationship. You don't have anything to hold on to right now. I mean, you do, because if you take your power back and say no more, then you're independent again. But what you're telling me is you're trying to hold on to your independence, but I don't see that you have any. And one of the only reasons I say that is because you are completely dependent on his perspective of you. I hope that makes sense. You are dependent on what he says to you and what he says about you. You are making decisions based on what he makes you believe about yourself. He's trying to make you believe you're wrong, you're bad, you're not good enough, and he's just doing all these things to you to, again, take away your power. And because you rely on his perspective of you, you are dependent on him. So there's not a financial dependence, of course, but if you have a dependency on someone else's perspective of you and that person is toxic, you're in a very bad situation. So again, another dot on the page. Just be aware of that. I have a few more here. He has threatened you in your own home by saying he's going to call the cops. This is definitely abusive behavior because what he said doesn't even make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to say that I'm going to call the cops on you and take you out of your home. Now, he's doing that because he has given himself more power. Now he's on the lease. But it still doesn't make any sense because you're on the lease too. Are they going to come over and see that you are doing something to hurt him? I don't know. I mean, he may set that up so it looks like that, but you got to be careful about that because if he is willing to say that he'll call the cops, he probably will. He probably will someday. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you decide that you need to do something for yourself, you need to leave or whatever, that he makes up a story. You have to be careful with somebody who just makes stuff up and tries to use a confusion technique like this. He's gaslighting you. If you're confused by something he does or says, what ends up happening is you become more compliant and more submissive because you're confused. You just want clarity. And if you don't have any clarity, you're more likely to do what he wants you to do. So you become unconsciously submissive to his wants or needs. That's what gaslighting does. It confuses the person into thinking that they must be wrong or not getting it right. So they have to rely on the person in their life, the gaslighter, to give them clarity. Because if you doubt yourself and he is the person that can give you clarity and confuse you at the same time, then you're relying on something that's not a reliable source. In fact, it's a toxic source. Gaslighting is making stuff up that confuses you. It causes you to think twice or try to figure out what's going on. And while you're in this confusion state, they continue to get what they want. So that is something you definitely need to be aware of because he said he would call the cops. And that's just very strange, especially for a brand new relationship, that this is already happening. I didn't even put this down on my screen here, where you've only had this relationship for like 6 months. It's a very short relationship where all of this has already happened and you've had the cops called on you and he's threatened to call the cops. That is not normal. That is not normal. Let me finish these up. You said you fight aggressively and you are being disrespected. Again, these are huge violations of your values. I'm going to assume you want to be respected. You don't want to get into aggressive fights. You want to be able to express yourself. You want to be able to have a conversation. Yes, we all get into arguments. We all get into heated debates, but you should be able to express yourself and you should have somebody that listens and understands what you're saying. And bonus points if they reiterate and say, so what you're saying is, and you don't like when I do that, and that hurts your feelings. Thank you for telling me that. That's bonus points. Not everyone is capable of doing that, but it's great when it happens. But what's happening here is you don't even get to express yourself. So that's another dot. And let's put another dot on this page, probably the last one for this episode. You can't talk about his behavior because he plays the turnaround game and starts blaming you, putting the focus back on you. So I think I talked about that a little bit. But if you talk about his behavior, or if you express yourself and say, look, when you do this, it hurts, or I don't like when you do this, he turns it right back on you and starts blaming you and puts the focus on you. And I guess the question is, do you ever get to talk about his behavior, or is it always about you? I think I said that today in the Facebook group. Somebody said, am I the abusive one? And I replied, If you have to ask, you are probably not. And this is something that I see over and over again. Somebody wants to know if they're abusive. They are probably not. It comes back to that question, is what I'm about to do or say an effort to change or control the person? And that's when it becomes more emotionally abusive. You're being manipulative. You're being controlling. So you have to be careful about that. So I read you the email. I gave you my responses. I didn't answer some of your specific questions like, how do I leave? I can answer a question, does he deserve a face-to-face explanation? With that, my very calm answer is hell no. Hell no, he doesn't deserve a face-to-face explanation because he knows what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows how to do this. Sounds like he's done this before. He knows how to tie himself in and mesh and intertwine in a person's life so that he gets taken care of like a baby in a rocker, and you're cradling his every need and every move. And I'm not putting you down for that. I'm not saying that that's exactly what you're doing at all. I'm just putting him in perspective. He wants to be taken care of. He wants somebody to pay for his bills, and he doesn't want to do anything. It sounds like he needs to learn about empathy and hurting other people. If he doesn't have that, then that's probably why he continues to do what he's doing. And you don't deserve that. You sound like a super nice person that could do a lot better. I mean, let me rephrase that. You sound like a super nice person that not only could do better, but absolutely doesn't deserve to be treated like this. Again, this person should be worshiping the ground you walk on. They should love you. They should care about you. They should want you to be happy. If I found out that I was doing anything that hurt my girlfriend, I would absolutely stop the behavior because I want her to be happy. If I knew I was hurting her, I would stop the behavior because I want her to be happy. That's the bottom line. And if he knows what he's doing is hurting you and he's not stopping, it's time to take care of yourself. So you asked, how do I exit such a situation? I can't give you a specific answer. All I can say is what I would do. I'm not giving you this advice. Do not take this as advice. Don't take it as advice. Just think about you and I in a coffee shop. We're best friends. And I say, wow, I can't believe you're in that situation. Why don't you just buy him a 2-day fishing trip, and then while he's gone, empty your apartment with all his stuff and change your locks? That's not me. I'm not saying this as a coach or a professional in any way. I'm just saying this as a friend in a coffee shop, because if I were in that situation and I knew it was dangerous to get out of that situation or scary or whatever, I would probably do that. But again, that's not what I'm telling you to do. I mean, you might have to get the police involved to get him out. But now that he's on your lease, you have some legal situation there now. Now, you can call, I think, the domestic violence hotline, and you can ask them this question. You can ask them this question because they deal with this kind of stuff all the time. They deal with stuff, and you have rights. And if worse comes to worse and he fights to stay in the apartment and he's not going to let it go, then I would talk to the apartment complex and get your name off the lease and move out one day and just get out of there. And then he's stuck on the lease and he has to pay for it or he loses it. But that is definitely a worst case scenario type of thing because it's your place. There are people listening right now that are yelling at the podcast saying, why don't you just kick him out? Why don't you do it? Just kick him out. Get your big brother over there and help him out the door. I know there are people saying that, and I wish I could give that advice. I don't necessarily know the best way to do it, but you may need to find out what you can do legally. So that is beyond my qualification to help you legally. Talk to a lawyer, talk to the domestic violence hotline, find out what they say about that. Because once they're on the lease, yeah, it's a little more challenging. But he did that on purpose. So keep that in mind. He put his name on the lease on purpose because he knew exactly how to manipulate you and manipulate the situation so that he wouldn't have to go. They sneak in like a snake and they occupy your space until you are afraid to be in that space without complying. Otherwise, you'll get bit, and on and on. And it's just a terrible situation all around. So I want you to stay safe. I want you to stay strong. You need to do something about this situation as soon as possible. At a minimum, practice gray rock. Gray rock is taking your emotions out of your conversations. You said it yourself. He's using your emotions against you. That's what emotional abuse is. When somebody knows your emotional state, they use that emotional state against you because they know how to make you feel the way they want you to feel. So if you cry one day, that's a cue for them to take advantage of that crying and do the next emotionally abusive thing. That's why gray rock is the reverse gaslighting for emotional abusers. Because if you go gray rock, which means you act like a dull gray rock with no emotions and you just answer things factually, they become confused because they are so used to responding to your emotional state that when you are not emotional, they don't know what to do. It kind of freaks them out because they lose their power over you. If you're not sad when you're normally sad, what does that mean? They don't know. They're confused. If you don't cry when you normally cry, if you don't get all mad like you used to get mad, they're not going to know what to do. And I'm not saying that this is a permanent solution, but it does shift the dynamic of emotional abuse. And of course, you need to do something right away. This is an emotionally abusive situation, and it will continue to drain you. What has happened will happen. Do something about it as soon as possible. That's the best I got for you. I hope this is helpful, and don't let them take any more power away from you. I wish you the best with this. Thanks so much for writing. Share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. Use the workbook to help you determine if you are in an emotionally abusive relationship, and let it give you the tools to pinpoint the specific unhealthy behaviors causing you to leave so many interactions feeling bad. If you're in a difficult relationship and you want to know what your next step should be, the assessment and the workbook will help you make decisions that are right for you. Visit loveandabuse.com for more information. If you've discovered that you are doing emotionally abusive behavior and you would like to change that about yourself, sign up for the Healed Being program over at healedbeing.com. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant. Because you are. Thanks again for joining me. We'll talk soon.